Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh and I'm coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke in Seattle, Washington.
And we have a feature interview again from New Zealand. Excited to get to that. But before we get into that, we've got a few things going on at the moment, Zach, including an exciting sponsor this week.
Yeah, exactly. We're launching our Sponsor of the Week feature, and Partel, who's already a founding sponsor of the Passive House Accelerator, is our Sponsor of the Week this week. So they're supporting the programming that we do, including the podcast, as well as the Happy Hour and Construction Tech Tuesday. And Partel's tagline is sustainable building envelope solutions for a smarter way to build. And their offerings include a Passive House Institute certified component system, the Partel Isoperm Plus. Anyway, they have lots of cool products. Partel.com. Check them out. And we're really appreciative of their support of the accelerator.
I want to find out more about their high-performance structural insulation. I'm kind of excited about high-performance structural insulation because it's so handy for avoiding thermal bridges. Maybe we should do a bit of a technical session at some stage and talk about some of those components.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. I've seen how important that can be in particularly with steel construction in a project in Pittsburgh. So it'd be fun to learn more.
Well, structure and thermal bridging are one of those areas where it's really easy to stuff things up. So having a product that helps avoid those stuff ups and allows the structure to do what it needs to do without leaking lots of heat is pretty awesome. Makes life easier for designers. All right. Well, let's get into today's interview. This is an interview. I actually had this conversation sort of midway through 2020, but still some really relevant stuff in there. It was a conversation with Sian Taylor, who I've known for some time because she was one of the first certified passive house designers here in New Zealand. And she originally trained as an architect on the other side of the world in Cardiff at the University of Wales. But when she moved to New Zealand, she did a bit of work for various companies, including one of our biggest architectural firms here. She now lives in the stunning central Otago region, which you may recognize if you've watched any of the Lord of the Rings trilogy or a few other big Hollywood movies. There's some pretty stunning landscapes down there, and that has been used for production of a few big movies. As well as being stunning, though, it is an alpine environment down there. And as one of the coldest climates in New Zealand, it's a great inspiration for Passive House, which is becoming increasingly popular in that part of the world. So to educate and inspire and deliver on Passive House projects, Sian has been a real advocate, not just for full Passive House projects, but just the broader sustainability as well. She instigated, along with some of her colleagues, the Architects Declare in New Zealand a couple of years ago, and she's been very active in that space. So I started out by asking Sian how she got into architecture and Passive House.
So, yeah, thank you for your time, Sian. It's great to speak to you again. We actually spoke, we had you on the show on the Homestyle Green podcast right back in episode 23, which must have been around about the time that Team Green was getting started.
I don't know. I feel like we've been going for a while, because I remember where I was when I did it, and
right,
and we'd already been through one office that was a couple of years, and then we were in a new office. So,
perhaps it was a bit more recent. But needless to say, you are one of the original passive house designers in New Zealand.
Yes. Yeah.
When did you do your training?
I think 2011 from memory, because we started the company in 2012, so I think it was probably the year before. Yeah, so it is a while, isn't it? Now, it's a while ago.
Well, it isn't, and it isn't. On a global scale, it's still, New Zealand's still fairly new on the scene. But on the other hand, it's nearly a decade on, and we've had a steady growth in the number of passive house buildings in the country. Certainly, the number of certified ones, but I would suspect in the background we don't really know how many other passive house buildings and passive house work is going on out there.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've got a sense of what's happening in your part of the world.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for us, we do everything with passive house in mind. So air tightness, obviously, balanced heat exchange, thermal bridge free, well insulated, to basically make the best envelope that either somebody can afford or whilst getting everything else that they want within their brief and their expectations. So what it means is that most of the time people are not achieving passive house to the state that it could be used for a certified passive house.
Yeah.
But it makes such a difference, like the difference that it makes compared to a typical New Zealand house is huge. So I think there's definitely a mindset shift towards it. I'd say there's a lot of people trying to understand it or trying to sort of dabble in it and get their heads around it. But in terms of the number, I'd say there was a lot more of that than actually certified passive houses, but I wouldn't actually know. In terms of what we do, we've done 2 certified passive houses and numerous houses that are not, but are all using the same principle, methods, etc.
And you get all those pressure tested and
everything's pressure tested. Yep.
So do you set a target for that?
Yeah, for the pressure test. We do. We started off specifying that it needed to be, and it depends whether we've got the European windows or not. So if we've got New Zealand aluminium thermally broken, which is the minimum we would do, we would typically say that a contractor could achieve anything up to 1.5 air changes per hour on that test. Which, to be honest, he can do a lot better than that. Having seen houses which are with the aluminium frames, you can actually get under 1.
Right.
But if it's the European windows, we'd always say it has to be under 1, and they easily do that. Like the contractors now are easily, getting under the 0.6.
Wow. So that's really interesting. So that just the selection of windows makes that much difference.
Oh yeah, definitely. Windows is the biggest thing, and I think it's the thing that that needs to change the most in New Zealand. The windows that we've got being aluminium predominantly, obviously that's the biggest conductor of temperature known to man, or I think it might be. It's one of them.
Aluminium is a really good conductor.
Exactly, and that's our window frames. So obviously that doesn't make sense. And even with the thermally broken ones, you're still going to get condensation. on the inside of the frame. So, but it's not just that. Like they are leaky. So
that's the condensation. So the conduction side. What we're talking about with the air tightness is how much impact they have. What, because they just don't seal properly?
Yeah, they're just not made the same way. I mean, they've just got gaps around them. So the worst are obviously like we would never put a bifold door in because they're a nightmare. But we would do sliding doors, but sliding doors obviously don't seal in anywhere near the same way as the European ones, which the whole thing basically moves up and down. When you open the door, it moves up and then slides, and then when you close the door and lock it, the whole
so
thing.
a lift and slide type mechanism.
Exactly. It locks into place, whereas
the
ones, there's just the seals, like there's just nothing about it is the same. You couldn't even say it was comparing apples and apples. They're completely different things. So
would you do a European bifold or not?
I don't know if you can get them.
Right. I just think it's a silly idea. Why would you do it?
Yeah. Look, maybe you can. I've just never seen them.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean that's says something in itself.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe it's not such a good idea to have a wall that concertinas like this.
Yeah, and bifolds are great when they're open, but when they're closed, you actually get an enormous number of transoms and mullions. So you've got your view's actually quite impeded. So unless it's a glorious hot day that's not windy, most of the time it's closed anyway. Like you only ever see photos of bifolds when they're open.
True. I was watching my new favourite TV show with my kids last night, which is the one where they have the virtual reality doing a renovation in the UK. I can't remember the name of it. But they had exactly that situation where the architect had specified bifolds and the owners had swapped them to sliding doors, because the view was better because there was so much frame with the bifolds that they wanted that more clear view, which they actually got with the sliding doors.
And do you know the other thing which we've just realised as well, which is an interesting thing? So we moved into our own certified passive house just before lockdown, about a month before lockdown, and we designed it. The front of the house is north facing. We've got a veranda at the front, and we've got a really big sliding door. It's, I think, the biggest that you could get in a container, basically. So it's one big panel that slides over another big panel, and then next to it we've got a really big window that's basically a big pane of glass. Now, because we haven't had the main entrance part of the house, which is that external works, completed yet, and because we've been living in it obviously 24/7 over lockdown, we've been going in and out of that sliding door pretty much the whole time rather than using our front door. And it's this massive heavy thing which moves beautifully, but you've got to move it quite a bit to get in and out. And
so you're getting workout in there as well.
It is a bit of a and it's like we've got a 5-year-old, and we also have ended up with 3 cats over lockdown, which is another story. And two of them were in the garden, and now they live in the house.
Right.
But anyway, so you're constantly opening it for whatever reason, like letting a cat out or letting your daughter out and so on. And you kind of realise that actually you need a hinge door. Like a hinge door is the most useful and practical type of door.
Yeah.
And so if you think of it from a practicalities perspective, we've now just changed a couple of designs that we've got on the table. So they've still got that ability, if it's a really hot day, just open those sliding doors really wide. But if it's going to be a really well-trafficked area, put in at somewhere along that elevation a hinge door.
Yeah. I want to come back to the point you were making, that you give some allowance for if someone is putting in stock standard aluminium framing, it's going to be much harder to get to below 1 air change.
Yeah.
what that speaks to is just, and like we said, part of the issue is the conductivity of that material and the heat loss and the condensation.
Yeah.
But knowing what I know now about the impact of infiltration on energy demand, that is a huge impact. That it's not going to. If someone's just looking at the numbers and saying, "Oh, this conducts so much and this conducts more," that's going to only tell part of the story, unless they're doing an actual PHPP type calculation that takes that infiltration into account. There's going to be a huge amount of heat loss associated with windows that don't seal properly.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a big thing too. We completely changed the air change rate to be really conservative on our PHPPs when we're using the aluminium frame.
Right, you just bump it up, knowing that they're going to be leaky.
Even if you do get a good air change test at the start, because obviously the air change test is only done, pretty much on day one. But they're just not built the same, so the seals will change and everything will change over time. So it's not going to be as good. Nothing about it is the same. So you just got to
hopefully we've convinced people to think twice about their window joinery.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing though, because it is always the biggest ticket item. So the way that we convince people or try to convince people is by doing a cost benefit analysis study. So we always do the PHPP during the develop design stage, and at the same time it goes to the QS with alternatives, which to be honest, most of our clients now, probably I'd say 80% of the clients are using the European windows, because it doesn't just come down to the numbers. So the numbers are part of it. And if we're trying to convince someone, we go back to the numbers. But for most people, they see these windows and they see it as a thing which is a completely different quality. So either it speaks to them and says, I've got the best windows. This tells a completely different story about my house, because people notice it straight away. Or they recognize that it's going to make a big difference and they just go for it anyway. So most people, and that is, I'm talking about clients who generally have got big budgets. But if it does come down to the numbers, it is the biggest one for us to put into, the PHPP and this cost benefit. So run through with the QS, okay, what would these windows cost relative to these windows, and a few different options, because obviously there's different options with the European type, as well as, going back to New Zealand thermally broken, or even the, there's the New Zealand one now, which is the triple glazed aluminium frame. So putting all those things through and seeing, okay, this is the difference it makes to my equation from a heat perspective, all the different equations in terms of this is what it's going to mean from a comfort perspective, and this is what it means from a cost perspective. But also then it quite often can, depending on the house and the site, which is why there's no rule of thumb, which is why PHPP is so important. But depending on the house, it can literally sometimes make the difference between the fact that they may or may not need a heating system. So if they don't need a heating system, which here, for the climate that we're in,
even down,
most of our clients.
So even down in Queenstown.
Yeah, if you've got a European frame, you generally don't need a heating system. You'll need some sort of heat. You always need some sort of heat. What I mean by that is you don't need in-slab hot water heating, which is obviously an expensive system to do.
Yeah, both to install and to run.
Exactly, yeah. So if you don't need to do that, because before we were doing PHPP, right back at the start when we were doing all these things but not modelling everything, we were looking at, systems like in-slab but doing ground source heat pumps, which, is a great idea and it's efficient, etc., but it's incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And you don't need it.
Yeah.
So,
if it ends up being redundant or people use it
yeah.
once and then realise they don't need it, then it's
Yeah.
a waste of time and money.
Well, it's, in some cases 60 to 100 grand, depending on the size of the house.
Wow.
And you spend that on, a better thermal envelope. And
that's a decent upgrade to Windows right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it's a no-brainer. Like, as soon as you look at that equation, you say you put this money here, you don't need this ongoing cost and you don't need this initial cost. You've just put it somewhere else. And you'd be, quite foolish if you didn't go for it.
That's a pretty significant point to get to if in Queenstown, which is alpine. So you get down well below free. In fact, you've probably gone down below freezing in the last couple of days. We're recording in the middle of winter.
Yeah, below freezing for a few weeks now.
Yeah.
I think the other day it was supposed to have gone down to -15, but I don't think it did. But
wow,
you could easily get down to -9, -10.
Yeah.
I think we model for -9 or -10.
Right.
Yeah.
But you also get quite high summer temperatures as well, don't you?
Yeah. It's the harshest climate in the whole of New Zealand, this central Otago. So we've got the hottest, driest summers, and we've got the coldest, harshest winters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that's good news for the rest of New Zealand and also for Australia as well, for making it work there. It shouldn't be that hard. Perhaps it means that making the numbers stack up and the budget stack up is a little bit more challenging in other milder climates. But certainly there should be no technical challenges to
not at all.
Achieving Passive House across any of New Zealand and Australia.
Oh, definitely not. Like, all of our houses would be Passive House if they were in Auckland.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, oh God, no, it's not hard.
I mean, and the contrast there, at the moment we've got a family, 3 kids in the house, 4 bedrooms, and we're running 4 separate heaters in each room, plus a heat pump in the lounge. And that's just the way we roll. A 1950s leaky house in Auckland, which is a far milder climate than down in Queenstown. Yet,
is that every day, Matthew, at the moment?
At the moment, through winter.
Yeah.
In fact, I've just turned my heater off in my little office here now in the middle of the day. But it's what. See, the great thing is here I know exactly what temperature it is outside in the morning because it's pretty much what it is inside.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, that's the best thing. Like, you just cannot explain the difference when you're in a passive house, and I always knew it because I was building it for other people and obviously experiencing their houses. But having now lived it for the last 4 months, 24/7, like you just can't explain. Like, you have no idea how cold it is outside, and it can be bitterly cold. And you might notice like there might be a subtle drop, and you actually do get quite sensitive to the drops in temperature. It's quite interesting how your body adapts, and the sensitivity both of the house and of yourself it changes. And you go, like, I'm sure we've got, because I looked the other day because I actually did a film for the Passive House Open Day, which I've just actually submitted today, of our house, and
nice.
I had to go and pick up the temperature thing, which my father-in-law's got at his house, which is where we were living before we moved in here, and I got it from their room in the morning, and it was 10 degrees in their bedroom, and it was, I think it was like 1 or maybe 0 outside. I'm not sure. It was pretty cold. Brought it back to ours, and it took a few minutes to recalibrate, but it was immediately 20 inside. And this is a house that my partner designed 16 years ago now, to code minimum. It's a stunning house, and for 8 months of the year it's beautiful to live in, but for the 4 harsh sort of winter months, you can't live in it. Like, I used to I used to dread like putting my pajamas on at night time because I just didn't want to take my clothes off. Like it was so cold.
Yeah. And that's how so many people live. It's reality.
Yeah.
Every winter.
Oh, I was thinking about it the other night because I noticed because our house we've just got a room that runs across the front that's on the north, and then at the back of the house to the rear we've got 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, and it's the rear is sort of cut into the hill, and it's on the south side of the house. So when you go through this sort of sliding door to the back of the house, you really feel it might be 1 degree. I think that it drops because the front room is this time of year it's full of sun the whole day.
Yeah,
and we keep the back quite separate, which is quite nice for your bedrooms. But you actually notice like maybe the 1 or 2 degrees that it drops, and you go, "Oh, it's cold back here." But then you look at the temperature, and it might be 19 degrees or something. But you notice it. Whereas before, I was living in 10 degrees and just accepting it.
Yeah. It's amazing what you get used to.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to pivot slightly towards aesthetics, and I guess it's a question about communication as well, because you've done some stunning buildings and you've had some interest in those buildings, and people are doing some got a bit of media attention with some of those designs, rightly so, because they are stunning buildings in an amazing location. How do we face the challenge, or is there a challenge, do you think, between achieving the absolute requirements of Passive House versus designing stunning buildings and still being at the service of or to clients who, at the end of the day, it's their decision on how far you want to take the standard?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of questions in that, because the first question I think you're asking is, does Passive House affect the aesthetics? And the second question is, do the clients affect Passive House and their desire?
That's a more succinct way of putting it. Yep.
And the different things. But yes and no. Look, I think the whole purpose of our company was to say that both of these things are equally important. We're first and foremost, we're architects, but for too long this has been neglected, and it's such an important thing that we're not valuing. We're not putting any value on our comfort. I gave a talk last night to Sustainable Queenstown, and it's the first thing that I've been involved with where there was too many people there and they had to turn 30 people away, which was quite exciting.
Awesome.
But it was great because there was so much interest. And this time of year, obviously, everyone thinks about it because they're so cold. But I was talking about the same sort of thing. This is the point of the company, and this is what we've taken as the two things that are most important. But you do have to have that mindset from the start, and I think it is a shift. It's a complete shift in your thinking as an architect, because you have to, like, for example, one of the biggest things you have to consider, because you can pretty much get most things right, but if you haven't properly considered shading, that's where it's going to fall down, because we underestimate how important shading is, and that does really change the aesthetic of a building. So for example, buildings with no eaves is part of the sort of the modern look of buildings, and it creates beautiful buildings, unless it's been designed in a way that building has always, you've known that building has to consider shading. So you almost have to change the aesthetic from the start to think about that. And there's lots of different forms that make it work in that sense.
Yeah.
Or you're looking at an appendage of some sort that you are doing to create that shading. So shading, I'd say shading's a difficult one, but I mean, the biggest thing which I still see people getting wrong is the orientation, and obviously you can't always be blessed with a north-facing site. But obviously, if you've got a north-facing site, it's like being born advantaged in some way. You've got everything going for you, and you've got all this free energy. But if you have got a north-facing site, and for some reason you're not capturing all that sun when you want it, in the winter and the off-season months, then it's kind of crazy. So orientation is everything, and then orientation combined with the correct shading, you do all of that stuff, which is free, basically. I suppose that's what I'm saying. That's the free stuff, and then everything else is the stuff that costs money. So if you get all of that right first, but that can affect the architecture because, like I said, you might be looking at a different aesthetic that allows for eaves or allows for an overhang of some description. So that would be the main thing. But we're creative people, architects and designers. That's the point of our profession, and we've got to learn to think in different ways. And if you're given parameters or challenges or things that you have to work within, in some ways that's a good thing, because you actually have a bit of a track to work to and say, I've got to do it this way. So I've still got to create a beautiful building, but these are my parameters. And if you can't do that, then maybe you just can't do it.
I mean, in Queenstown, pretty much everything's about the view, and so I imagine that orientation depends a lot on where the lake is or where the mountains are. So
it does.
And you've played around with things like the sliding shades as well to create that. If you don't have an eave as part of or if eave's just not going to be enough to. Because you mentioned that the north is key, so facing the sun through the southern hemisphere. Yet shading is still the problem, right? So sun is a blessing, but it's also, you got to be careful with it.
Oh, exactly. And the reason that north is such an easy one is that you can immediately get what you need by creating a veranda or an ingao, as we like to call it, which is the Japanese term.
Nice.
And it means that you basically cut off that sun when it's too high. But when it's below that, it comes straight into the building. So this time of year, if you look at, I'll send you the link to the clip I've just made, or the video I've just made for YouTube, because you can see that the sun comes right in at this time of year, but we cut it off when we don't want it in the house because it's just going to get too hot. So it's the easiest thing. But as soon as you've got east or west facing buildings, and you're right, the sun is basically in the way of the view, effectively. So west is probably the trickiest, and we've got quite a number of west-facing sites that have got absolutely beautiful views. But it, to be honest, it doesn't matter if it's a passive house or not, because the house that we just left, which was my in-laws' house, is a west-facing house. And in the summer, you end up shutting all the blinds in the main living space because it's getting too hot, and it's too glary. There's too much sun. So if you've created that in a way that you can move a screen or move it to stop the sun, but not shut the whole room off, then at least you're still getting some of the view. But it's a problem for everyone, and it's going to only get worse because the planet, the temperatures are rising. So.
Does making it a passive house reduce the importance of orientation?
Does it reduce the importance? No. No, actually, sorry, that's not true. Does it? I don't know. I'd say it's still really important. It's always important. But maybe it does. Maybe it does. Yeah. Look. Yeah, it probably does, because, for example, in some ways I don't find south facing as challenging, because that it's the cold side, but you're actually not having to worry about the all this different shading.
Right.
And if you've got the ability, because we've got a lot of south-facing sites with beautiful views.
Yeah.
Obviously, you want to capture. Your biggest challenge then is, I guess, trying to convince the client that we don't want the whole wall to be glass.
Yeah.
Because there's not much, you can still get a beautiful view if it's framed and still get the glass, but you don't necessarily need it right to the floor or all the way along and so on. So and then at the same time capture as much from, because it will be the back, from behind you, from the north. So you have got, because it's not just about the fact that you've captured free energy. It feels good, having sun in your house just makes you feel good. It's uplifting.
And it's not necessarily direct sun either. It's the light often.
It's the light, but I mean direct sun is lovely if you've got shafts of light. The whole sort of idea of biophilic design, which is the fact that if you've got places that captures sunlight within your building, it could even just be a courtyard or something that changes throughout the year and throughout the day. It's reminiscent of nature. It's like, being in a forest and you've got the light changing throughout the day and you're experiencing the light changing throughout the day. And that's an important part of what we need as humans, so that we're not cut off from nature. If we can recreate that, it's really important.
How important is it to go all the way for Passive House, do you think?
You mean to be certified? Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm a little bit controversial on this one, because I think, well, let's put it this way. When the Passive House standard was set, one of the main criteria was that it was affordable. And that was relative to a certain place and a certain time, and a certain set of, parameters that's quite different to what we're dealing with here in New Zealand, and particularly here in Queenstown. So I think everything about Passive House and the way that it's been worked out, it just works. And if you can use all of that to get as close to Passive House as you can, because to give an example, there's houses which I know are being designed. It's not actually myself designing them, but down just outside of Queenstown, in sites that are not only south facing, they lose the sun for a lot of the year, and they're on the side of the lake. They're beautiful. And they're trying to achieve Passive House, but it's going to be really, really difficult to get to Passive House. Almost impossible.
And expensive.
Because, without doing some ridiculous amount of thickness to your walls, and even then you may not get it because you're just not getting the sun. So, there's a lot that goes into it, and I think if you're doing the best that you can, using all that the system teaches us, then you've already come so far that you've made a massive difference. And
I think that's a really pragmatic approach to the reality of today. But also, I like that, going back and thinking, what was the original intent of the standard in the place that it was created?
Yeah, because that's the whole point, that it's not zero. There's the 15 kilowatt for heat. We're not trying to get to zero. So if you've got the same level of comfort, but effectively you're just using more energy, so be it.
Coming back to my earlier question about communication, though, does that cause a branding issue for someone doing that? Because you are achieving so much, and it's so much better than what it would otherwise be. Yeah. But it doesn't have a name, does it? Because it's not. No. If it's not certified, it's not Passive House with a capital P and a capital H.
Yeah.
But it's still really, really good.
Yeah, I know. And then that comes back to who cares about that, because to be honest, the clients don't care.
No, they're just stoked to have a beautiful, warm, dry, comfortable house.
Yeah, and yeah. So,
and in fact, they're probably feeling similar because they want to talk about it as well. They want to show people and describe how it works
people,
and why.
they just say it is, and you have to remind them that
they just say it's perfect.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they come to you because that's what they want, and then you talk to them about the fact that within their brief and often their budget, that they're not going to be achieving passive house. But really, they're actually not after that. They think they're after that, but they want all the benefits of it. But
right. So they're not after a plaque on the wall. But
no,
they're after
the amount of people who want the badge is really limited. Really limited.
Right. Yeah.
And so therefore, when I say who cares, which sounds really flippant, I guess I mean in a different way, does it really matter? Because the thing that matters is that people are being put into a better standard of housing, and this needs to happen on a wider scale. That's the biggest problem that we've got, is that it's not the standard of the building code is so bad that unless it moves in the right direction, which it's currently not, all we can do is house by house and try and improve people's standard of living. But effectively, the building code is what needs to change. And so having a standard like passive house is, something which in some countries they're moving towards as the standard. It sets a goal and it sets a line in the sand of this is the ultimate to a certain degree. But ultimately, the code needs to change because everyone just needs to move in the right direction.
Which leads us to the future and where things are going. That is a dream of ours to influence the building code.
Yeah.
In the interim, the more realistic interim, where do you see things going, and where would you like to see things going, say, in the next 5 years?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't know. I guess. Yeah, that's a difficult question because it does get frustrating when you look at how much influence you can have without having a mass change. But I think that's all you can do is keep pushing forward and keep educating and showing people the difference in what it means and dispelling the myths around it. So just keep going and keep trying to get the message out there. And to be honest, I guess that's an argument for the fact that houses may not be fully certified passive house, but they're doing everything else that passive house is, because it at least gets people talking about it and it gets people understanding things like air tightness, which is not commonly understood in New Zealand. Like I had someone say to me the other day, the question, and I still can't believe, and I don't even know where it's come from, but the idea that you can't open all your windows and doors. I know most people still think that. And you kind of like, well, where does that come from? I'm not quite sure why people think that, but they do. So it's all of those things. It's starting to, and that's changed. That's definitely changed in the time I've been doing things. I feel like there's a big shift towards people getting it, or at least trying to understand it. And
well, having to turn away 30 people from a presentation in a cold evening is a pretty positive sign that something's changing.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. Yeah.
Hey, well, just tell us where's your practice at now? Where you've got is it just the two of you? Oh, you got 3 people.
No,
there now?
There's actually 4 of us. We haven't updated the website, but we need to.
Awesome.
So interestingly, over lockdown, we obviously all had to disperse to our own homes. And also over that time, I think, as I said, we just moved into our new passive house, and we built it in a way that the upstairs was going to be a separate 1-bed flat. immediately that had to become our office, which was great. Like, it worked brilliantly, and we just love it so much that we don't want to leave. So we've basically decided to move the office back to our house on a permanent basis. So we've got another 4 staff, and they are either working from home or they can come into the office and work on a hot desk.
Right.
But we are now, what do you call it when you're dispersed? Like, we're a dispersed office. We've got the hub, which is our
virtual.
house.
You got a virtual office.
Yeah.
And what's the extent of your geographic clientele? Are you doing work all over the country?
No, we've yet to do anything in the North Island.
Right.
I definitely would, but we're yet to be asked to do anything up there. So it is South Island. It's predominantly around here, but we've got stuff in as far afield as Blenheim, and we've had a few further down south in Dunedin and early on in Christchurch. So a bit around the place, but it's predominantly around here. So
and do you just do design, or do you do modelling for other architects as well?
We occasionally do some modelling for people that we know, but to be honest, we're so busy, we haven't got time. We would do it if I wanted to help someone out and I felt like they needed
right.
it.
Yeah.
But I am thinking of helping a few architects locally just to understand what energy modelling is, and because it's such a key part of what we need to be doing as architects, and PHPP. I know there's only a certain part of it that really gets you the information that you need from a design perspective. So again, this is probably controversial because I'm sure this is not what I was taught or what I should be saying, but you don't need to do the whole thing to get key information. You just need to understand a certain part of the spreadsheet, and then you've got the key information that you need.
Yeah, well, I've heard other architects say that as well, and as well, especially if they're doing work in the same or a similar region. After a while, you kind of get to know what's going to work and what's not, and you might need to run it through as a verification. But people, as they get more experienced, they kind of know they especially know where the big wins are. And where the really important stuff, and it's really if you're struggling to get down to that last decimal point, that's when you've got to dive in and tweak every single tab.
Yeah, and I think the reason we use it more is for this cost benefit, because it will be those big decisions, as I was saying before, over things like the windows, what heating system we're going to use,
right?
So it gives us that critical bit of information, because then we can say, look, because most people still want a fire. That's the other thing. People want a fire. So you say to them, you're not going to want to put a fire on because you feel warm. And when you feel warm, you don't feel like lighting a fire.
Yeah.
But that's just a mindset shift that it takes people to get their heads around. And so we always give them an outside fire because we know they'll use that.
Right. But, heat up the atmosphere instead.
Yeah, but to be honest, it's been one of the best things. So in our house, obviously we don't have a fire because we're a certified passive house, but we have got an outside fire, and almost every weekend we've been out there in a cold, completely black night, but with us and friends and kids all around the fire, toasting marshmallows and under the stars. And it's awesome. Like, you just get wrapped up, you go around the fire, and then you come inside and the house is absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
So
so you can enjoy it outside, knowing that you can just jump inside and it's going to be warm.
Exactly.
You don't have to worry about I'm going to have to go and run and jump into bed.
Warm? Did I keep the fire going? All of those things. Doesn't matter.
Very good. Hey, well, thank you for your time, Sian. It's been great to chat, and I appreciate your controversy. I don't think it's that controversial.
I think it's good. And that's partly why I wanted to chat to you, because I do think there is a place to have a conversation about being pragmatic and about what's needed the most. And there's a whole nother discussion that we need to have about affordability outside of the little ecosystem that is Queenstown and those pretty stunning areas, because that's an issue that's facing not just all of this country but around the world, affordability and living conditions as well. So I think the solution is definitely in there somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And that was Sian Taylor of Team Green Architects. She's based in Central Otago in the South Island of New Zealand. Stunning location. And I said it before, but I always really like to acknowledge those people who were early adopters in their space, which Sian was. She was, as I said at the outset, one of the first certified passive house designers in New Zealand. And it's something I think it's easy to take for granted, as we are surrounded now by lots of designers in this space, and we have a lot of knowledge to share and a great community. But in those early days, it was really a bit of a leap of faith for people to go down this path. So it's great to have people like Sian, who has been a leader in her field, and she continues to do that, not just in the passive house world, but also with things like Architects Declare and really pushing the boundaries of broader sustainability in the practice of architecture. What was your outtakes from that conversation, Zach?
Well, I mean, one of them was the reminder that code minimum in New Zealand is it kind of sucks, right? So we in the U.S. we have a lot to be jealous about with you guys in New Zealand. But code minimum isn't one of them. Building code is not one of them.
Yeah.
And so what that means, and we've alluded to this in other conversations, is just that the delta between code minimum practice and passive house practice is so big in New Zealand. And I think that provides some important context when having that conversation about, well, do you go all the way to passive house certification, and that whole what Sian referred to as a controversy in approach. And I think that it's important as we kind of consider those and weigh the arguments there, that we do that in a understanding that context.
Empathy is really important there, I think. It's easy to take a side, to take a hard line on those issues, particularly with the passive house being a standard, and say it's either a pass or a fail, it is or it isn't. But we also need to be empathetic and appreciate that people are going on this journey. I know it's frustrating that any house that's not built all the way to the standard and get certified can be considered as a lost opportunity, and in a lot of ways it is. But we have to really consider where the industry is at and meet them and in an appropriate space, and push in a gentle, compassionate but firm way to encourage movement in the right direction. Just to underline that context, I mean, I quite often present to architects here, and I have to tell them that it's commonplace in most places in the United States to have a blower door test as a requirement or as a standard practice of construction, because we're just introducing that, and very, very few buildings even get a blower door test done. Very few architects even know what a blower door is. So that's kind of the level that we're at. We still have a lot of people that will flatly reject the concept of airtightness, because they're under that conception that buildings have to breathe, and airtightness can't be a good thing. So that's kind of where we're at. I keep reflecting to the rest of the world and say, look, this is where we've come from. This is where others have gone down a similar path. Let's catch up. We don't have to reinvent the wheel or go through making the same mistakes.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And the blower door test is something that Sian is bringing to her practice. I mean, she's got that dialed in with, I mean, she has different thresholds that she expects for airtightness based on the window package. You know, there was a whole that, yeah. And
yes,
I think that, I mean, that hits on a couple things. One is how much potential we have to drive costs down because through the spread of components at scale. You know, like there's so much more room for us to see cost savings as window manufacturers are, you know, do scale. So that's one theme. But the other theme is that she's measuring, you know, with the blower door, she's measuring. And so when she talks about not getting all the way to Passive House certification, this is not the kind of green washing of inspired by passive principles that you sometimes see. You know, I think that she's running energy models and she's looking at air tightness and measuring air tightness to really understand the building. So that is passive building practice right there. So whether you know, so we can argue about, you know, how important it is to get to all the way to the goal, but if we were successful at transforming the industry so that we were doing passive building practice all the time, you know, the battle would be won.
And measuring is so important, so you know where you are, because we have this, we know from research done by other associations that the general trend is towards more air tightness, but most houses would have no idea where they sit on that curve. And if you look at the data, there's a medium which is trending downwards, but the extremes are still pretty broad. You know, you could be anywhere from 1 air change per hour, maybe 3 to 4 might be standard, right up to, I've seen houses, brand new houses, which have 15 air changes per hour in New Zealand or Australia. And that makes a big difference on not just the performance, but how you operate that building and the things that you can do to improve both the health and the comfort, not to mention the energy efficiency inside. But most people would be completely unaware of that because we're just not even testing. So that's where we're at. Stunning scenery, amazing climate. Our challenge is to convince people that the climate is best kept outside and that it's good to have windows to look at that stunning scenery. They don't necessarily need to be floor to ceiling windows all the time. But we do need to frame the outside, and we need to be able to close it off in the vast majority of the time when those climatic conditions aren't the absolute ideal for health and comfort.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing that really came through in the conversation was this. The way that she talked about the freebies kind of that with orientation and shading, you know, that if you can get those things right, and how that's impacting the aesthetics of her practice. And we got a chance to see a little snippet of her work last night at the happy hour from her open days video, and that showed one example of the really clean, elegant design moves that she's making to achieve the shading that is so important in her work. But that it was really interesting I thought to hear her insights about how Passive House, how she's harnessing the kind of the boundary conditions that Passive House sets to help achieve it as another set of design challenges that she gets to play with. You know, and so that was inspiring to hear for sure.
I like that concept of freebies as well, and it puts the emphasis on good design, because a window the same window put in a good place versus that window put in a bad place is going to cost the same in materials, but could have a big difference on the performance. So that puts the emphasis and the importance and responsibility on the designer to use those materials in the most effective way. And even things like, taking out ridiculous corners that don't need to be there, simplifying the shape of the roof or the form of the general envelope of the building. These are all things that the architect can do to make a really good fit for purpose building without inducing unnecessary extra costs.
Yeah. And it also is an act on the part of the architect to reclaim responsibility and agency around delivering comfort to the occupants. So which is I think an overall theme of the passive house movement, several decades that authority got kind of ceded to mechanical engineering.
Yes.
And that's starting to change, which is exciting to see.
All right, very good stuff. And can we put a link up to some of those videos in the show notes for this? Because they're definitely worth checking out.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
There's some inspiring stuff there. All right. So as we mentioned at the outset, we've got some people to thank specifically this week for helping out with this episode, but also the Passive House Accelerator in general.
That's right. Yes. Thank you to Partel. Please visit Partel at partel.com. They're our sponsor of the week.
And what have we got coming up this week and beyond that?
Yeah, we're in the midst of retrofit month for Passive House Accelerator. So we just heard from Jesper Cruz about a cool Passive House retrofit that he did, a multi-year retrofit of his own house. So we're going to continue this theme next week with on Thursday for New Zealand and Australia, a happy hour presentation by Amy Faya of Baxt Ingwe. She'll be presenting about a really cool retrofit of a historic firehouse. So masonry, this old traditional masonry building being retrofitted to Passive House. The day before that, I'm sort of weird chronology here, sorry. The day before that, we'll be hearing from Brandon Weiss of DeVel, which is a prefab manufacturer based in San Diego. And he's going to be talking about his offsite Passive House projects. So that'll be cool. And
that will be cool. There was quite a lot of excitement already about that yesterday at the Global Happy Hour. Prefab is super interesting. Another interesting thing that we hope to explore in the future is the nexus between prefab and retrofit. But we'll hold on to that thought. And then on February 15th, so Monday, February 15th in North America, Tuesday, February 16th in New Zealand and Australia, we'll have the Passive House Retrofit Summit. And this is another summit that's being organized by the Accelerator's Mary James, and it will feature some of the boldest retrofit programs from government and other organizations that are going on in North America right now. So it's, I think, 6 different programs, including Retrofit New York and NYSERDA and many others. So please register for that. And then, of course, educational stuff around the world is in full swing now, and we have links. It's really ramped up.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's such exciting stuff. I mean, it's a big challenge. We talked about that before. It's far easier to build a good house when you're starting with a clean slate, but retrofitting is such an important thing because we have all these buildings that exist. Some of them are getting past their use by date, or even ones that are not even 10 years old could do with a really decent upgrade. And it's challenging. It's hard, but it's good work, and it's important work. So great focus for the month.
Yeah, definitely. And we're far enough now into the kind of the spread of Passive House and deep energy retrofits that we have some really great examples to learn from. So it's going to be fun to see that in the coming week.
Awesome. Hey, I just want to say a quick hello to Europe. Because I know that we often talk about the time zone in America and New Zealand and Australia. That's because we're biased. But I had a catch up with Ben Adam Smith this week, and he's he'll be on the show eventually because we recorded an interview, so I'm excited to bring that interview sometime in the future. But I just want to do a quick hello to Europe and the UK because we do really appreciate the work that comes out from there. And in fact, I know that Jessica was on was it the Global Happy Hour or
I think she was at Construction Tech this week. Yeah, I mean, it's so
which is around about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I think it's 1
for Darmstadt.
Yeah, I think it's pretty brutal. Thank you for doing that. I guess I haven't been saying it, but it goes with me, so I'm saying it goes without saying, but that's not really fair. So much
Hello
inspiration.
Europe is what we want to say.
Right, exactly. So much inspiration from Europe for all of us. So
yeah, it's always great to hear the guys from Ireland and the UK on the call. We really appreciate that. I know that the time zone does suck a little bit for you guys, but a lot of great work's coming out of there, and you're definitely part of the community. So yeah, just shout out to you guys, and thanks for being part of that.
Yeah, here.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Zach. I think that wraps it up for this week.
I think so, Matthew. Thanks a lot.
Cool. We'll talk to you again next week.
All of the work of Passive House Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, would be impossible without the support of our sponsors. So we want to take a moment to give a hearty thank you to our sponsors. Our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you.